Welcome to the What You Don't Know podcast, brought to you by the Know Like Trust Report, which is a simple, actionable, and very easy survey that asks the most important questions. I'm Teresa Nichols, and I am honored to have our guest today, who is John Ginter, who has had a lot of jobs and has been in a lot of positions, but his longest one was he was a teacher at a technical school to juniors and seniors, and he was teacher of media, right? Is that what you
Yeah.
just call it, media? Okay. So I think that's mostly what we're going to talk about today, because I think what's really interesting about that is, one thing is that a while ago there weren't a lot of options for school, and now we have so many options on what you can do for school, from homeschool to traditional school to religious schools to tech schools to STEM schools. There's so many schools now, which is really interesting to me. And I think technical schools are great because some people are going and maybe not doing high school, right? They're just going straight
Well,
in.
they still have the regular core of English, social studies, whatever. They just add something to it. In my case, it was digital media.
Okay, that's cool.
And not when I started. There was no such thing 35 years ago. But
Yeah.
some go on and they take nursing, some go on welding, some in auto tech, whatever. Give a kid an option that says you don't have to go to college to be a successful worker.
Right. Yes, that's really cool. And sometimes if you're doing it really quickly and you are taking some classes and you can just start working, that might even be better. My son has a 4-year degree and is having a very hard time finding a job because he doesn't have the on the floor experience.
Right.
So I think the technical schools are really great at just getting you exactly what you need to start working.
Right.
Yeah,
And
so that's really cool.
it was unusual for my class because I had gone to school. I had a master's degree, and I would have parents say, well, do they go to college or get a job? I said, one or the other. But I said, in my career, you go to college, at least to a 2-year school, just so that when they look at you, they go, oh, all right, he went to college. And my belief about that is most people want to know if you went to college and if you finished because they want to see if you put in the effort. They really don't want you to just start right out of school, at least at that level.
Okay, that's interesting. So in what you do, as a teacher to juniors and seniors, this is interesting to me too, because that is a very impressionable time because they're getting ready to go out in the workforce. And I remember you had put a LinkedIn post that said, the first day your students come to school, you give them a card that says, I trust you. And that was so cool to me. I said, I'd love to have John come on the show and talk about this because it's like feedback before you need feedback. It's kind of cool. It's like
Well,
trusting someone right out the gate. So I wanted you to share some of that. I thought that sounded amazing.
well, when I first started teaching, I didn't know what to teach. And my supervisor at that time said, well, we don't know. That's why we hired you. So I put together the course of study based on my college experience, both undergrad and grad. And then I realized that I would have 25, maybe 50 students, 25 juniors, 25 seniors in my class. And in order for them to do projects, they would be borrowing a $3,000 camera or a $1,500 camera. And it just made no sense to me to think, if I don't trust them, I'll spend my lights up on where is this piece of equipment. So it struck me that what I should do is just go ahead and tell them before I even get to know the first kid. I'd give them a card and it said 100% trust, use it, don't lose it. And
Mm,
And I posted that before on Facebook, and I've had kids send their pictures back in their car, and they still have.
It's awesome.
Now, that changed over the years because I don't know, it's the generational issues, but it worked for, out of the 30 years, it worked for 25 of them.
Mhm.
That the kid, because a lot of the kids you get at a vocational or career tech school, they've never had that. They've been told to
Wow.
sit down, be quiet, and take your notes and whatever.
Yeah.
And I tried to teach them as though they were my employees. I'm still the boss, but let's talk about something if we were going to put it together. Let's, follow the rules and do whatever. But when you have equipment that some kid can take and break it, what do you say? Well, do I worry about them taking it home? Well, I did, but I never had a camera stolen.
Nice. So it was the school's equipment.
Right.
Okay. And
So
you had
this,
purchased the equipment for the class, or it was
right.
already there, or
No, I started the class at Middletown. It was Manchester Technical Center. I
okay.
started that class there. So I was the first teacher. And then we eventually were traded off to Butler Tech. Um, and so, yeah, school buys the equipment. And I guess it was all on my back what I was going to do with it.
Yeah.
Even to let them borrow the equipment during the day, during the class time. Our classes ran 2.5 hours. Even even to have that would take a lot on me to say, okay, I got to trust this kid to walk down to the auditorium and get some pictures of something.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that that at least I was fair enough with them. And I think that that's what they liked, that I didn't try to put anything over their eyes. In schools today, a lot of times you want to tell the kids something and your boss will say, well, it's a need to know situation. And if it's need to know, they don't know. They don't need to.
Mhm.
I didn't like that. And so early on, I never really discussed that with any supervisor or even the superintendent. The superintendent used to come in once every 2 weeks and record a show. And so he got to know my students. They would run the show. We ran 3-camera operation, and I usually directed those, but he got to know them. And I think he got to see how much trust I put in them. And that's why they were successful.
Mhm.
And my goal was, I don't care if you become a video person, a photography person, or whatever. I just want you to be a valuable employee to somebody. Use your head.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then once you basically when you gave them the trust first, then the no and the like came later,
Right.
and it all just kinda happened naturally is what it sounds like.
Well, it was very simple for me because I bought into it. Now, I don't know what I would have done if this equipment had been stolen, but at that time, I must have been better at being a young person. Um, I would have been what, 10, 11 years older than my seniors.
Okay.
So I, and they trusted me because I trusted them. And that's not true for all of them, but I would say 90%. And they borrowed a camera overnight over the weekend, come back, they would have shot footage. And then we had very little editing equipment at that time, but they didn't mess with that stuff. And the editing room was across the hall from where we were. So
Okay.
there were times I'd have to leave students by themselves to work. I wouldn't get over there to check them every 5 minutes, but every half an hour or so, I'd pop my head in. You guys doing okay? Um, and they worked. They
That's
did
great.
their job.
Yeah. That's awesome. Do you feel like because it was a technical program that it was kind of the students that signed up for it were just ready for that kind of responsibility?
My first group of junior, my first group of seniors were just thrown in there, I think, just because they needed bodies, because you get
Okay.
paid, the state gives you X number of dollars for each student.
Yeah.
Today, they don't do that. Today, they have you have a class, here's enough money you get for these students. And if you have 50 students in one class, they want us to have 30 at one time. You were still getting the paid. Those students would still get the same amount of money for the program as you would if you had 25.
Mhm.
And I think that's what they still do. But my juniors that year, I had, kids who were in the top 10 of their class. I
Mm,
had kids who were probably in the bottom 10 of their class.
okay.
And, and the pattern figured out after 5 years was it was every other year. Bad seniors, good juniors, then
Oh,
good juniors or good seniors, bad juniors.
alright.
I
Huh,
wouldn't say bad, but bad's the wrong word.
challenging, more difficult to deal with
Right.
or yeah, okay.
And it just got to be once we got to Butler Tech, because now we're serving the whole county.
Mhm.
It was tough getting kids, and Butler Tech still has an issue with how they recruit students. I think they're on a first come, first serve now, or a lottery, one of the two.
Mhm.
But back when we started, there was a number, and that magic number in the 1990s for the senior class, I think you had to have 15 and you had to have 18 for the state to remain a program. And
Okay,
didn't have that problem really. So,
sure. So what about feedback? What about we talked about a little bit about how juniors and seniors they're making this big transition from school, from education to their careers. How did feedback play into your class and preparing these students for this next level?
well, being a new teacher, the first year I had to learn, you got to ask them, do you understand? Does this make sense? And so that was on a daily basis. If I'm teaching you something new, do you get it? And I have to thank my first supervisor there. She really gave me the issue. I was complaining to her one afternoon. I said, I don't know what to do. She said, stop teaching it, go home, figure it out, come back and do it again, different. And so for many years, that's what it would be. If I'm in the middle of something and they're snoozing or they're not paying attention or whatever, I would change whatever I was doing to another task. And then I'd come back to the next day because I made mistakes too. I might pronounce a word incorrectly or say something because like I said, I wrote the lesson plans, I wrote the course of study. In my lesson plans, sometimes I used an Apple IIe computer, and they might be 5 pages, single space for 2.5 hour class. And that was kind of tough for me. There was another teacher and I who shared an office, and she didn't start teaching until I think the afternoon. No, she's taught in the morning, but then she would come in after her class and she would give me feedback. She'd go, that's good. That's good. You ever try this or try that? And so I got comfortable with that. I'm never comfortable with feedback. I don't know if anybody else has that problem, but with my students, it was, okay, do you understand? And then at the end of every major project, there would be like the first quarter might be a music video, and then there would be other smaller projects. But the music video, I had a survey I would hand them. I said, it's an anonymous survey. What did you like about it? What did you learn? what can be better. And I did that for years and years and years. And from that, I got it. And I even told them, I said, if you have something you want to talk to me about, take me to my office and sit down and tell me. I'll listen. And I
Yeah.
was honest with him. I was honest with him. I would say, I don't know if I will take your advice, but I'll listen to it. And many times I did. And I said, that's a good idea. And when I took their advice, I used to, whoever brought it up, they would say, why don't we do a fashion show? And I'd be like, what? And then during one of the presidential campaigns, somebody said, why don't we do a debate? And I said, okay, you're in charge of it. And if they didn't do anything, we never did it.
Okay.
We actually did do two debates between two social studies classes. And then eventually I had a girl who I had told her the same thing as a junior. And she went to one of our bosses during the summer and said, can we put on a talent show? And we'll raise the money she had cancer in her leg at one time. And so she wanted to raise it for Cincinnati Children's. And
Wow.
I said, fine. I said, but you're in charge. And so she got the framework for it and then brought it to me, and then we worked on it. So the feedback was, I'm getting them to do things on their own because I trust them. And if they didn't follow through with it, it was never such a big project that I could say, well, we have to do it. I just say, well, I don't
Right.
want to do that one. But most of
That's
the time we did.
that's really cool. A couple of things that I heard you say that were really interesting. One is that you yourself personally are uncomfortable with feedback,
Yes.
which is so cool to hear you say because I know there are other people out there like that that hopefully can benefit from this show because it makes feedback less scary to hear somebody else say, yeah, I've never been really comfortable with it, but I made it work. I said, hey, you got feedback from me, take me to the office, talk to me. Instead of saying, no, I don't want your feedback. I don't want to hear anything. You dealt with that discomfort that you had.
Right.
So
Well,
that's
as
awesome.
a as a teacher, you get it because your boss is going to come in 3 times a year and observe you.
Okay.
I was very lucky for most of my career to have bosses who were perfectly okay with feedback. They would come in, they'd make sure everything's going okay. And I had one boss, he was a very good friend. He would ask students. He'd go up and talk to them, then he'd talk to me, but he never took notes. He just remembered it all, and then he would come back and he would pull me into his office in the afternoon and say, hey, that was good today. I enjoyed myself. Um,
Oh, very cool.
he was a great, had been a football coach. And so he was very good at giving feedback.
All right.
Now, I won't say that every supervisor was like that because later on, as we got into different personalities or what, you had a supervisor who thought their job was to come in and they use feedback to point out something you've done wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why most people, at least teachers, if they were doing good with their supervisor, had a good rapport with them, then they were okay. But if the supervisor was coming in and just trying to make points to point out what you're doing wrong, then you just became, it's like, can't you say anything good about it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you just take it to what it is. I can't remember what I was going to say. I had a client when I was a newspaper and advertising. I had a client who told me he could get a 12-year-old boy to do what I did. And he was so good. And I thought, oh, aren't you nice? Um,
That's weird.
but yeah, well, he wasn't happy with it wasn't my ads I was designing for him. He wasn't happy because we had people who were in circulation. We had a free weekly newspaper and somebody in his neighborhood who was in circulation was dropping them in his dumpster. And they had
Mhm.
these big bags. And so I said, well, I'll go see if I can find out who does that. But chances are they're not going to own up to it.
Hmm. And you never did find him?
No.
Oh.
And the, so that guy was a tough guy to deal with. But that was as a client. And I had always thought anyway, that for your client, you don't say no and you don't have a problem.
Mhm.
I was a young man working with clients for the first time. And so I wasn't quite ready on how to deal with that. Now, as I got into teaching, the first supervisor I had, I talked about before, it was like close to the end of the year. And she goes, don't you ever say no to anybody? Because I would get all kinds of requests for, can you do this? Can you do? And I
Mhm.
said, well, no. It was my opinion, and I learned that from the hospital. My opinion was because what I did had no real effect on patients. So they could get rid of me. It was like that. Eventually did, but not me, but that department. And I learned that you've got to make yourself valuable in the workplace. And then you show your boss what you're doing. You show other people what you're doing. And so the feedback part, when I never liked getting it. And so at least the boss would give you a heads up. I'm coming in next week or whatever. And so you could prepare something that you could get good feedback on.
Mhm.
But I really liked the one principal I had who just came in.
Yeah.
He came in and he used to tell me, he says, I've got to get out of the office. And he goes, can I come in? I said, you come in anytime.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't afraid of what I was doing or what the
Right.
kids would be doing.
Right.
And he enjoyed it because it gave him a respite from discipline and all that other stuff.
I liked how you said that some people, when they're doing feedback, it's almost as if they're just looking for anything negative.
Right,
And I learned a long time ago about the sandwich approach, how you say positive, negative, positive.
right.
And I use that all the time, even now. It's so helpful. I
Well,
love the sandwich approach.
well, they used to do that and taught that in management at the hospital, but
Mm,
it was in a sandwich. It was, you're doing a great job, but it was the but that would get you. And I'm like, I don't need to hear I'm doing a great job. First of all, just if you got a problem with me, tell me what it is. That's how I am. And
okay.
I think a lot of people are like that. If they're doing all right and they know that, but if there's an issue, it's like, tell me so I
Yeah.
can take care of it. And we had a principal once who said, don't come to me with a problem unless you have a solution. And I would say, I'm coming to you because I don't have a solution.
Yeah.
You're the boss. So give me some answer.
Right.
But yeah,
Get that idea though of, hey, I have a problem, and this is kind of how I thought we might solve the problem. Not necessarily that it would go that way, because maybe that person would say, oh, okay, I get your problem. This is how we're going to solve that problem. But yeah, I mean, I kind of like that idea of just having a suggestion of, how we can solve the problem.
well, usually in my case, by the time I got to them, I'd already tried things. And
Yeah.
so my my question to them I would include, here's what I've done. I don't think it's working.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
and
Yeah,
so I
that's a
would
good
say,
idea. I
and
like
then I
that.
would say, do you have a better idea?
Right. Yeah. Because
Is
you
there something
tried, you're saying,
right?
I already tried to solve the problem as an adult person, I did try to solve the problem. I'm not just coming at you whining, like, oh, I got this problem, and haven't tried to solve it. So yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
And
I
I've
love how you said, oh, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
yeah, well, I was going to say it, and I've had friends who used it specifically that way to go to their supervisors to brag about what they've done.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, I don't have time for that.
Right.
First of all, I'm disorganized and I don't have a lot of time, but I would not want to go in and say, hey, I had this problem. Here's what I did. Aren't you glad? Pat me
Mm-hmm.
on the back.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense too. Yeah, I'm not big on like self promotion like that. I'm not really good at that. But I can see putting it in a report. If you, let's say that your supervisor said, hey, every week I need a report from you, that's where I would put that stuff. I'd say, I had this problem, here's how I solved it, just as a
If
part of
it
my report.
and if it was a student issue, I'd always did that. That was something
Okay.
that a union member advised me to says, if you have a problem student, immediately write down what happened, what you
Yeah.
did. You might be able to take care of it the next day. But if it
Mm-hmm.
escalates, you have documentation.
Or yeah, right in writing. That's true. I love how you said too that the teachers would give each other feedback. You have feedback coming from so many different directions because you have feedback from your students,
Right.
you have feedback to your students, you have feedback from other teachers, which is really cool. I feel like that would be very helpful in that environment. And then you have feedback from your principals as well. So, you got all
Right.
this different feedback coming from different places, which is
And
really
some
cool.
and sometimes we'd get that, in my case anyway, the teacher closest to me was a graphics communications teacher.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so we were working together on a lot of things. And so he would say, yeah, did you think about this? Did you think about that? So that relationship's very good. But I also would have students who weren't mine. I would have a student or a group, they would come to us and they would say, we need to make a video about whatever it was. And then we would sit down. I'd sit down with a couple of my students, and we would discuss what that can look like. And they were, these students were like, oh, thanks for that. And they would say it's a good idea.
Okay. That's really cool
So,
too. And I think that speaks to that taking that time to sit and talk about it is so important. I think we're all moving so fast that we don't sometimes take that time because we might think of it as potentially an empty space, like potentially nothing comes out of it
right.
because you don't know what's going to come out of it. But that's
Well,
great that you did that.
well, that was the frustration most of my seniors would have with me is that I would say every month we would do, I don't want to say a variety show, but we would do like a clip show or something that was humorous. And then another group, they would do a thing called story time where they would read books to the kids and we recorded it all like reading Rainbow. And
Oh, very fun.
when I sat down with those groups, I would say, okay, let's talk about it. And I think I ran that into the ground way too much, but because they would get real frustrated at, we're going to talk about this for, and I would say, we're going to talk about it until I'm comfortable with what we're doing.
Yeah.
Uh, but then I had another class. I loved this class, but they figured out early on, if I'm teaching, if they did this, I would move on. They never questioned anything.
So they understood what they had to do, and as long as they did it, you would just move on. Is
Right.
that what you're saying? So
Yeah.
one thing that you said, and this kind of comes back to that, and I have to call it something, and maybe it's out there, it's called something that I don't know, but I kind of call it spontaneous feedback
Yeah.
because it's feedback that you get that isn't direct. It just kind of happens. And from whatever that is, you know what you need to change. So, for
Well,
example, earlier you said, if I'm teaching a class and they're zoning out and they're not getting it, and it's like eyes are glossed over, you're like, you just come back the next day and you change how you're doing it. And that to
right.
me is that spontaneous feedback.
Right.
And what you just said was that your students were getting your spontaneous feedback. They were saying, oh, okay, Mr. Ginter is doing blank. that means that we can move on. Like we're ready to go to the next thing, which is cool
Right.
that it's going both ways, that you're both giving that spontaneous feedback.
And what I could do with them, depending on the student, I could just let them go and say, do that. I had a group within the last 5 years I was teaching. They started asking us to make a video for graduation. And I told them, I said, I won't be able to go. These kids have to do it on their own. And I
Yeah.
had 4 kids who I could send out, and they went out in a van because I learned early on that you're not supposed to let them go alone.
Yeah.
Uh, and so they would go out, and I say, come back, show me what you got. And they'd get everything I needed, and sometimes even more creative.
Nice.
So I think that's the big deal, is them being able to understand that I have trust that way. And that's why whatever feedback I had for them, good or bad, they would say, okay, thanks, we got it. So yeah,
I like that
instantaneous
too.
feedback,
What'd you say?
instantaneous feedback.
Instantaneous feedback. I like that too, that you said that if the trust is there, the feedback is easier.
Right. And
That's
that's why,
crazy to think
and
about.
that, and that's why employees have a tough time with it, because they may not trust their boss. They come in with an agenda, not an agenda to improve you, but an agenda that says, I'm picking this one kind of out of the air, but like at the hospital with, okay, you got to review your employees yearly.
Mm-hmm.
They either get a 3% or a 5% raise. And so you go into it knowing, okay, I got a goal here. What do I put them at? Because if you
Yeah.
get, and that's how teachers start to feel about it, somebody coming in. And because the boss, they don't trust the boss enough to say, he's going to help me or she's going to help me. And again, probably the first 25 years of my career, I never had that problem. I was okay with it. Just as I got to be an old guy.
Well, that's a very long time to teach juniors and seniors. And
Yeah.
I'm sure during that time it changed a lot, right? There were a lot of changes in the industry, right?
Well, I was doing analog stuff before. It was all tape based, audio, tape based video. We didn't use cameras because we couldn't afford them. So we were using video cameras, and what we had was limited. And then all of a sudden, I had an opportunity to go to a convention with some Apple people, and I got to see the main digital transition, and
Okay.
that was a big learning curve for me. Um, I think kids though today, if they start in a class, they're already well advanced where I would have been,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
because
Yeah.
they play around with stuff more. Sometimes they get the wrong thing, but because kids didn't like me telling them, use this specific codec or something, whatever you're going to do. If you're going to work for a video, I want you to log it first. I don't, follow this pattern. And if they didn't believe that it was important, they wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I know now, we have social media, and interestingly, John and I have never met in person, which is so weird to me. I just keep thinking I had to have met him somewhere, right? I had to have met you at a networking event or something.
well,
But
theater,
did we meet in the theater?
yeah, damn
Which one?
Yankees,
Is that where I know you from?
yeah.
What did you do? What did you do in Damn Yankee?
I was old Joe
That's where I
Way,
know you from. All right. Well, that
yeah.
makes sense then, because I was like, have I ever met John in person? But
And
okay,
that's where you get feedback at the end of every rehearsal. Your
right?
director would say, I need you to do this. I had a director
Absolutely.
once, I had a director once who never gave me feedback, or notes, never gave me notes.
Wow.
And I had a teacher in high school that never gave me notes, and he went to the same school I did. had the same teacher, and I said, you're just like her. You don't give me any notes. And he goes, you want a note? And I said, yeah. He said, suck less. He was being funny because I was asking for it, and it put me in my place a little bit. Okay.
Yeah.
But when you
No,
get
that's interesting too, because I think you can get feedback that you can benefit from. And that's a way better way to give somebody feedback, is something particular versus like, be less horrible. It's like, well, where should
right.
I start? What should I start with? What is so horrible? Tell me what's horrible so I can change it. Yeah.
Or they would say, walk this way or do whatever.
Yeah.
Uh,
How many
and
performances have you been in? How many? Is it all musicals? Is it just theater? How many theater performances have you done?
most of it's all musical. I was in Of Mice and Men. And this was Greater Hamilton, Middletown. I've been in a bunch. I was in
Okay.
1, 2, 4 or 5 Middletown Lyric Theater, and then 4 or
Okay.
5 with Greater Hamilton.
Wow.
Not so much now,
Mhm.
but Scrooge takes up all my time.
At Kings Island.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, I should have gotten that connection when you said that. But I didn't even think about that. And I love theater. I would love to do it more. I know Hamilton got so competitive that they had so many people like for the Beast. They had so many people
Yeah.
audition that I was like, I'm not even close. I'm not even gonna come close to this. So I stopped auditioning because it got to be very, very it was like Broadway for a while.
Well, and that's your feedback. But it's worse than feedback because they don't tell you.
Right.
They only tell you if you get a part. It's like a job. I
Hmm.
would tell students, I would say, you're going to go in and you're going to talk to them, but they may not call you back with a yes or a no.
Yeah.
Assume if you don't hear from them, it's a no. But
Right.
it's okay. It's okay for you to send them a note, email them, call them, say, hey, I'm looking for a job and I have another opportunity. Have you made a decision yet? And I think that's what students need to learn from feedback is that for a job search or an interview.
Nah. It's very unassuming. It's just like, have you made a decision yet?
Right.
They could respond pretty quickly and say, yes, we chose somebody, or no, thanks for reaching out. You're still in the running. That's really nice. I always felt awkward asking those questions because I just felt like it's been so long. They probably already filled the position.
Well,
And sometimes there was just a delay because it's such a big organization and something happened, everything got slowed down.
or
So,
somebody
yeah,
goes on vacation
yeah. Or
but
somebody leaves the job, the person doing the interview left the job or something.
right.
Yeah.
One of my ending questions was always to ask them, when do you plan to make a decision? And may I contact you? And so
Yeah.
I would have that to fall back on. Um, but I remember getting no responses whatsoever.
Oh, I have gotten no response to a lot. And I've even gotten stuff like you're not qualified when I knew I was qualified. They just hit a button to send me something and it came back like you're not qualified. And I had to not take that personally because I was like, man, I fit every qualification. I know I'm qualified.
Well, what a lot of the HR people who don't care about you anyway,
Hmm.
they'll run your resume through some software that'll match your resume with words in their job description.
Yeah.
And if you're not a match, they figure it out like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We talked a little bit about HR earlier and just how my naive self, I really thought HR was for the human resources, was a resource for me. But
Right.
ultimately, HR is mostly just to kind of protect the company, rather than protect the people. And I was heartbroken when I heard that because I'm an empath. I want to listen to people and solve problems. And where a lot of HR people are not really there to do all of that. So yeah, so that was kind of a bummer for me to hear that.
Well, sometimes they're listening to you to get something on you.
Hmm.
I've had that happen.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy. It's so crazy.
and so they don't give you any feedback, but they're going, "Oh, we're having lunch here and you're talking about your boss and I'm
Yeah.
just maybe you're just venting." But then
Yeah.
they take that out.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. I was in a situation like that I went to an event, and at the event they said, "Hey, if you're having an issue, we really want to hear from you. We really want to talk to you." I mean, they organized this whole thing and had 50 people come to this thing. And then when I said, "I'm having an issue, I really need to talk about this," nobody called me back. I probably called 3 times thinking, "This is a mistake. They really want to hear from me." And I was so shocked that ultimately it was just a farce. It was just a
Right.
yeah,
It was it's I had a college professor that I answered a question incorrectly. He said, "Why do you do something?" I said, "To make the employee feel like they're being involved." And he says, "You're wrong. You really must make them feel like they belong. Not just to make them feel like that, but let them be involved."
right. Yeah.
And that's one thing I learned from him, luckily, um, that if you're going to if you're going to talk to somebody and then you're going to ask for feedback or whatever, mean it.
Yeah. So
And
true. Yeah.
and I think it's okay if your boss says whatever, but they can say, "I don't care what you're doing. Do your job. Shut up." At least you start out at that point knowing what you're going to get. I forgot what I wrote for that. It had to do with that very thing. If they didn't want to your opinion, tell me that.
Yeah.
Don't
No, I like what you said too. You said basically your feedback is do your job. I trust kind of that I trust you up front, right?
right. And
That yeah, that's
and the ball's back in your court. You have two options.
mhm.
Do your job and find the way through
Yeah.
or quit. Walk with your feet. That's
Walk with your feet.
uh yeah, that's the answer right there. I'm gonna see you later.
My
Actually,
I have a employer now who is they're very laid back and I love it. It's amazing. And there've been a couple times when I had to see if they're as laid back as I thought they were. And every time it's come back and I'm like, they really are. They are really laid back. And we talked a little bit about how kind of like you said, if you let's say you're sitting somewhere and you're not doing your job, but you're sitting there and then you kind of do somebody else's job because it's there and you can do it. And then you come back and that person says, "Don't do that. That's not your job." It's like, "Yeah, but
right,
I'm sitting here waiting. Shouldn't I do something? Should I pull these weeds or, like pick up this garbage?"
right.
And they're like, "No, that's somebody else's job. Don't do it." Well, I was at my employer and there were kids outside and they were fighting. And I rolled down the window and just looked at them. And they looked at me back and they broke up the fight.
Yeah,
And my employer, when I walked in, said, "Thank you for doing that." And they could have said, just don't communicate
right,
with them because that could get us in trouble. They could have been all like, "Oh, wow, that, we got to talk to our lawyers about that." But, they just said, "Thanks for being an adult. Thank you for doing that."
well,
And it was
schools do
awesome.
that a lot. Schools will do that a lot.
Yeah.
You have this big responsibility for kids, but
Hmm.
there are certain things don't cross that line.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that's the that would be the least problem with education is that you gotta be careful what you say and what you do. It's like I never talk to my kids about my political preferences and
Absolutely. Yeah.
rarely talk to them about my religious preferences or what I'm
Sure.
studying.
Sure.
But some teachers don't do that. They want to make, I don't know, they think they're making the kid think, and I don't think they are. I think they're making the kid pick sides.
Hmm. Yeah. It's one thing to say, "Go vote."
Right.
It's another thing to say, go vote for whoever, go vote for a person, a particular thing but I think it's amazing when people just say, you know what, I don't care who you vote for, just go vote. That's the important thing is
Right.
that you are voting. Yeah, that's really
Right.
good. I like that. Well, John, thank you so much for being on this show. It's been so awesome. Is there anything else in your notes that you feel like would be good to end with? I know I saw you looking through your notes, so I thought I'll just go ahead and, see if there's anything, like really good nuggets in there that you wanted to share before we sign off.
Probably not. I think I hit most of the things I was saying. I did have something when I worked at the hospital, doing media at the hospital. It's like, your client would be a physician, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a mistake early on. I probably still do. I talk too much. And so I would tell my employer, I would tell the physician, well, here's what I had to do to make this slide. And, I spent 10, 15 minutes saying that. And my boss caught me one day. She goes, you know, they like to eat the hot dogs. They just don't want to know how they're made.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true. Nobody wants to know. And I just came to this realization maybe a couple of months ago. I said, it's the fault of English teachers, social studies teachers, who made us write 5 pages.
Mm-hmm.
We would just, if I can say in 1 page what you need to hear in 5,
Right.
why not do that?
Absolutely.
And that's my biggest problem. I, I'll write you an email and I'll tell you everything.
So you're still learning, you're still making changes and making
If I have to.
improvements, and I love that. That's great. So are you doing any media work? Are you doing any consulting or like
Uh,
freelancing?
Occasionally somebody will call me for something, but I'm not getting paid for it or anything. They know that I do something. In my church, I run our Facebook Live service.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Uh,
staying up with it because I know that kind of stuff even changes all the time. They're constantly making changes, and so that's good.
right.
That's
And
great.
then I do some photography stuff for church and whatever. But
Okay.
I've had my old hospital boss, who was very good, the female, not the man. She works for a nonprofit in Cincinnati, and she's wanted me to help her make a video. She started in on it during COVID, and I said, we'll have to wait till that's over. And then it just got put aside.
Yeah.
I may approach her again.
But yeah, that's a great idea. Well, and I'd like to send you a free No Like Trust survey for being on the show. And
I'll do that.
one really cool thing that I've noticed with the survey results is these comments that you get from people who never said out loud things they appreciated. And I read mine, and it had been a while, and I just kind of went back and reread things. And there were people that I thought when I worked with them that they were not happy. Like these
Right.
people wouldn't say, "Oh, thank you," or "Yeah, that's right." It was just like, you're like, "Okay, great, thanks." Like,
Right.
what do you
They
call that?
hated their job so much. You were great, but they hated it.
Yeah, that like straight face, like poker face, and I could never tell. And one guy sent me a message and said, Terry was always professional. She always got the work done. And I was in shock to see that because I thought that guy did not like working with me.
Right.
So it might be fun to get some cool feedback from people from it.
Well, as I said, that's what I would do with my students after every project. Here's a sheet. Here's 10 questions. Give me an idea of something else we can do. And that's how some of my projects were created.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, actually, lately I've been getting a lot of my feedback just from kind of that instantaneous or, that spontaneous the feedback that you get.
Right.
And I kind of think, had I not hit that, had that not come to me, I wouldn't have grown. I
Right.
wouldn't have found this really cool thing. Like, I have a clicker that I
Right.
use with my clients, like when they do their reps. and I'm clicking and clicking. And one day it just came to me that I want to keep the number on the clicker. So at the end of the workout, I can show them how many reps they did in an hour. And I thought, what a fun thing to do. So had I not been doing the clicker and, and to give them that feedback, I wouldn't have thought, wow, I could just keep adding this up and show them all the reps they did in an hour. I thought, how fun is that? Like, to keep them motivated. So that was kind of cool. So,
I got
all
in
right. Well,
trouble from fellow employees. I would sit at a staff meeting with my pen,
yeah. Yeah.
and this one lady used to throw stuff at me. She said, that's my feedback to the boss. Shut up, let's go.
Right. It's spontaneous feedback, right? Yeah, I love
Right.
that. Well, that is a great way to end the show. So thank you, John. I really appreciate you.
Welcome.
It's been a great interview. And
Okay.
maybe we'll be in a show soon together.
Maybe.
That'd be fun.
Or if you come to Winterfest, just find
Yeah.
Scrooge.
Find Scrooge. I'll do it. Bye. Thank you.
All right. Bye.